Welcome to this evening's forum for candidates seeking election to the United States Congress representing Maryland's 6th District. The three candidates with us this evening include Mr. George Glock, Mr. Neil Parrott, and Mr. David Trone. My name is Richard Wilson, and I am the current president of the League of Women Voters of Washington County. This evening, we will first be providing each of our candidates with a 2-minute opportunity to introduce themselves to you. For these introductions, we will invite the candidates to speak in the order that their names will appear on the November 3rd ballot. The candidate introductions will be followed by a series of 7 questions that have been formulated by our League members. And following the League questions, we will pose questions from our viewing audience. I should point out that beginning with the League question round and continuing into the audience question section, we will vary the order of who gets our questions first to allow each candidate to field questions for the first time the same number of times. Candidates will be given 1 minute to respond to these League and audience questions. Okay, we're going to put on the screen an email address for those that are in our viewing audience, because following the 7 League questions, we will turn to questions submitted by you, the viewing audience. This is on the Washington County League's Facebook page. And this question has also been on our website for a couple of weeks, and some people have chosen to email their questions to us in advance. So that's the address now showing on your screens. Behind the scenes, we have a team of League members who will be working to combine similar questions. Please word your questions so that they can be asked of all the candidates. We will not be using questions that are posed to only one candidate, and we will try to avoid posing questions that are partisan in nature. And now let me introduce you to our moderator this evening, Betty Mayfield. Dr. Mayfield is a professor emerita of mathematics at Hood College, where she spent 38 years and was chair of the Department of Mathematics. She is also a past co-president of the League of Women Voters of Frederick County and has served as a board member of the League of Women Voters National Capital Area. Dr. Mayfield, take it away, please.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening, everyone. At this time, our candidates will make brief opening statements. Each of you will have 2 minutes in which to make your introductory remarks. First, we welcome Mr. George Glock, the Green Party candidate. Mr. Glock.
Yes, thank you. I've shamelessly borrowed these words to relate to you tonight. For we as a people are strong enough, we are brave enough to be told the truth of where we stand. This country needs honesty and candor in its political life, but I don't want America to make the critical choice of direction and leadership this year without confronting that truth. I want us to find out the promise of the future, what we can accomplish here in the United States, what this country does stand for, and what is expected of us in the years ahead. I also want us to know and examine where we've gone wrong. And I want all of us, young and old, to have a chance to build a better country and change the direction of the United States of America. It is at the root of all of it, the national soul of the United States. Others tell us that America is deep in a malaise of spirit, discouraging initiative, paralyzing will and action, and dividing Americans from one another by their age, their views, and by the color of their skin. And I don't think we have to accept that here in the United States of America. All around us, not just on the question of the cities, not just the question of poverty, not just on the problems of race relations, but all around us, the fact is that people have lost confidence in themselves and each other. It is a confidence which has sustained us so much in the past, rather than answer the cries of deprivation and despair that could split our nation finally asunder. Rather than answer these desperate cries, hundreds of communities and millions of citizens are looking for their answers to force and repression and private gun stocks, so that we confront our fellow citizens across impossible barriers of hostility and mistrust. And again, I don't believe that we have to accept that. I don't believe that it's necessary in the United States of America. I think we can work together. I don't think we have to shoot at each other, to beat each other, to curse each other, and to criticize each other. I think that we can do better in this country. To be continued.
Thank you. And now Mr. Neil Parrott, the Republican Party candidate. Mr. Parrott.
Dr. Mayfield, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight with the League of Women Voters, co-sponsored by Antietam Cable and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. I appreciate what you're doing, getting us together for this forum. I'm Delegate Neil Parrott. I've been a delegate now. This is my third term, so I've been involved 10 years as a delegate. I'm a native Marylander. I was born at Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is now Walter Reed. Grew up in Anne Arundel County, where I went to Old Mill High School and graduated there. While I was there, I had an African-American history teacher that was just phenomenal, one of the best, Mrs. Calvin, and it was the year 1984. And in that year was Ronald Reagan, Bush versus Mondale Ferraro. And VCRs had just came out. We were able to videotape each one of those debates, and I was able to bring it into class. And that helped shape my policy. Ronald Reagan just did a phenomenal job, and I was thankful to be able to be part of that class. And she would never tell me what her political affiliation was. She was a super teacher, and I'm thankful for super teachers like that. My wife taught at Middletown High School. My mom, she taught here at KI in Anne Arundel County. So from Old Mill, I went to the University of Maryland at College Park, where I graduated with a civil engineering degree, a very practical degree because I'm a common sense kind of candidate. From there, I went to Mount St. Mary's University, where I graduated with my MBA. After graduating from Maryland, I was working with the State Highway Administration. I'm a traffic engineer for 13 years. And then I was a city engineer at the city of Frederick. The official name was the Deputy Director of Public Works for Engineering at the city of Frederick. Then after that, I started my own company, which I still run today. It's Traffic Solutions Incorporated, where we do traffic studies and transportation analyses for private developers and also for the government. And I really, again, appreciate the time to be able to be with you here tonight. And I'm thankful that we can have a good exchange of ideas as we present our different viewpoints. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Congressman David Trone, the Democratic Party candidate and the incumbent in this race. Mr. Trone.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters. We're on. Yeah. And Washington County and Frederick County, and Antietam Broadband, and the Frederick alumni of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority for hosting tonight's event. And also thanks George Glock and Neil Parrott. It takes a lot to run for office. It's the magic of democracy, so thank you for being here tonight. I ran for Congress for what I call the 3 C's: compassion, civility, and competence. We need compassion in government. We have to care for each other. With pandemic, we really can see how important compassion is. Civility, we need to work and treat each other with civility. So whether it's Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter. We're all Americans. Let's work with civility. And of course, competence. We've got to get stuff done. If we don't get things done, why do we waste our time? I've lived those values in Congress. I kept my promise to be a champion for Western Maryland. We've opened 4 district offices, Gaithersburg, Frederick, Hagerstown, and Cumberland, and helped over 7,000 people. I've kept my promise to work on ending and prioritize the opioid epidemic that's ravaged our state. Working with both parties, we passed laws to help seniors and families on social isolation. And I've kept my promise to be part of the voiceless, stand for the voiceless, and never take a dime from PACs or lobbyists. And I've come from the business world to think long-term. We've got to think long-term. We've got to think about our children. And I look forward to talking about these long-term plans to create a better and a healthier world for our children.
Thank you all. We now move into our first round of 7 questions. Each of you will answer each one of those questions. You'll have 60 seconds in which to answer. Please let me know if you'd like me to repeat the question. So here is question number 1. If elected, please share with us the congressional committee assignments of greatest interest to you and explain why those assignments would be the best use of your skills and abilities. And Mr. Parrott, we're going to begin with you.
Thank you, Betty. Certainly, as a delegate, I've been on the Judiciary Committee. I was there for 2 terms, 8 years. I learned a lot there. There were a lot of very important issues that came up, and I love that committee. I wouldn't mind that in Congress. But now I'm on the Transportation and Environment Committee in the House of Delegates, and I really like that committee. As I look towards Congress, I'd like to be on the Transportation Committee because there are certain roads that need to be improved in District 6. I-270 has got to be widened. I-81 is a safety hazard. Thankfully, we're widening across West Virginia for the bridge into Maryland, but it needs to be 6 lanes to 3 in each direction all the way to the Pennsylvania line, not only for safety, but for economy. Also, US 219, and we have to work with our neighbors in Pennsylvania. We need a better north-south corridor in the Cumberland area. US 219 is the way to do it, and we need to have 4 lanes divided highway to connect the part that's missing so that we can have that corridor serving vehicles in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trone.
Thank you very much. Since I'm already in Congress, I asked and requested to be joined the Education and Labor Committee. And education, that's our future. Just like our children, they're our future. So I've been a champion for them. Also, I've joined the Joint Economic Committee. It's appointed by Speaker Pelosi. And that's a good way to look at my business background to understand how we move the economy in the right direction. The third committee I'm on is the Foreign Affairs Committee, because we can't just live in a vacuum here in America. We've got to be part and parcel of what's happening around the world. And we've seen that with COVID. It's all connected. Now, next year, my mission is to work on the Appropriations Committee. So that's what I'm going to try to get on. It's a challenge. I think I've got the right stuff for it. And then I can use dollars, opioids, mental health, and criminal justice reform, and of course, broadband.
Thank you. And Mr. Glock.
Yes. Well, I'd like to use my background as a math major, 2 degrees in math, almost a major in physics, and also got to the master's level in computer science at UMD in College Park. And also I work for the Department of Defense, although I put that down last. My preference would be to help out in the areas that are most needed right now, which deal with health. That is, I'd love to see be able to help get a improved Medicare for all package passed in Congress. Certainly our COVID problem would not be nearly as bad as it is if we had done that 4 years ago. And the environment, of course, being a Green Party member, that's important to me. Have solar panels on the roof to heat our water and generate half our electricity, and I've run out of time.
Thank you. Our next question is related. If elected to Congress, you will also have to choose which caucuses to join. Briefly name caucuses you'll join and explain to us the pros and cons of always voting the way your caucus urges you to vote. Mr. Trone.
Well, right now in Congress, there's 3 major caucuses on the Democratic side. There's the Blue Dogs, there's the New Democrats, and the Progressive Caucus. And I am in the New Democrat Caucus. The New Democrat Caucus embraces all the important social issues that we believe need to be addressed, LGBTQ, healthcare, et cetera. But at the end of the day, that's the moderate caucus, the caucus that embraces working across the aisle, working with each other, and 70% of my bills are bipartisan. And that's absolutely crucial. And, you know, we've got to be able to work with each other. And that's what the New Democrats do, is work across the aisles with real common sense solutions that can actually get accomplished and not pie in the sky that's never going to happen. Let's change people's lives for the better. And the New Democrats, that's what we do.
Thank you. Mr. Gluck.
Yes, well, clearly, as Congressman Trone mentioned, it's a progressive caucus I'd most likely join. if I were to get to Congress, I would have to disagree with Mr. Trone. If I get to Congress, it's because there are an awful lot of folks who are now independents who are fed up with the way Congress has been running, and both Democrats and Republicans. And I think they'd be looking, if I got there, there'd be many more AOCs and the like. So it would be not as difficult as it seems to be right now to shoot for pie in the sky and maybe land a little short of that. And I would certainly be doing everything I could to bring us back to a New Deal type of situation, which we've gone away from for the last 40 years.
Thank you. Mr. Parrott.
Thank you. Well, as I look towards serving in Congress, I want to make sure that I serve on the caucus that really represents the values that I think most people in Western Maryland and Frederick and Montgomery counties care about. So I would be part of the Freedom Caucus. I believe that people really want to make sure that our freedoms are maintained, not for our own sake, but for our kids' sake and for our grandchildren's sake. The Freedom Caucus is part of the Republican caucus. There are mainly two, that one and then mainline Republicans. But the Freedom Caucus really goes out on a limb to stand up for our freedoms, whether that's life, our liberties, these are our freedom, whether that's religious freedom or freedom at work, and then also our property, defend our property rights. I think it's just so important. That's one of the big reasons I ran as a delegate to begin with, is that we've got to maintain our freedoms. We've got to get the big load of government off of our back. They tax everything. When we first get our money from income tax, then we have sales tax on that, property tax. I mean, the taxes go on and on. I would be part of the Freedom Caucus. Thanks for the question.
Next question. We know that the boundaries of congressional districts in Maryland are set at the state level, yet we know from looking at the district maps that some of them, including our 6th district map, were drawn to influence the results of the election. Would you support legislation to require states to draw boundaries that preserve geographic compactness and contiguity, as well as equal population when districts are redrawn following a census? Why or why not? And Mr. Gluck, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be one of many more democratic, small d democratic bills I'd like to get passed. I probably would be amongst the very few. I'd be happy to win this district once and then lose it, because we've gone back to making Western Maryland, you know, before the last census, registered Republicans were about a quarter of the state, and 2 of the 8 were Republicans representing us in Congress, which kind of made sense. So the Democrats gerrymandered the state to be rid of 1 Republican. I'd be happy to ungerrymander the state and have compact districts. And then in addition to that, do a number of other things like ranked choice voting and others, getting money out of politics and the like. So that would be just one part of a large number of steps to make the state more democratic, small d democratic.
Thank you. Mr. Parrott.
Well, certainly. I started mdpetitions.com, and we got 3 bills that were very controversial onto the ballot so that people could decide. And one of those bills was the congressional districts of District 6. Unfortunately, the question was very unfair. We sued over the question to try and make it fair. We did win that lawsuit, and so it did go forward. But this map is very, very troubling. The only reason that Governor O'Malley admitted it, the only reason he drew it was to get rid of Congressman Bartlett. It is a +6 Democrat district, but it is very winnable by a Republican. I believe that the states need to be able to follow their own laws, and they can. There was a 5-4 decision in the Supreme Court where all the liberal justices said the states had no rights to go beyond the Constitution. All 4 conservatives said, of course, state rights. So I would like to see Maryland follow what we already have in state law, which is that we need to respect political boundaries, respect geographical boundaries. I would also like to have term limits for Congress, and I would also like to see the states require members of Congress to live in their own district, like George and I would, but unfortunately David Trone does not.
And Mr. Trone.
Yeah, I think the voters are looking for a person with ideas and executing on those ideas that works across the line with Republicans, independents, so we get stuff done. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for a zip code. That said, gerrymandering is a national problem. We need to fix it. H.R. 1, the first bill we passed this year, which I co-sponsored, fixes gerrymandering for the country. 5 states have brought in national commissions, statewide commissions, that have equally done the races, drawn thoughtful boundaries, which have been accepted and embraced by Republicans, Democrats, and independents in all 5 of those states. That needs to happen across the entire country. Gerrymandering leads to extremists like the Freedom Caucus, the caucus of no, not the caucus of moderation, where we can work together as Americans.
Thank you. On to our next question. Do you believe that our social media platforms and our government are doing enough to prevent foreign actors from inserting misleading and false information into our electoral process, as has been reported to the American people in public testimony before the U.S. Senate by intelligence officials? Why or why not? Mr. Parrott.
Well, thank you for the question. Let me tell you what, when you're trying to run ads in Facebook, it is so hard. You almost have to hire a consultant, which we didn't do. So I've like gone through the whole process and be able to do ads on Facebook. Very, very difficult now. I don't see how foreign people would really get involved in this election using Facebook and Twitter. But I can tell you this, with Twitter, I'm very disappointed. They just censored the public spokesman for President Trump, Kaylee. And I think it's very, very disappointing that they would have that much authority. I think Congress needs to act and say, no, these platforms need to be fair. And we need to be able to have fair communication across the platforms, kind of like the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, where it says, you know, there are certain rules that you have to follow. And I think we've seen Twitter go too far and violate the freedoms of the people who are on Twitter trying to use their accounts, just trying to get simple information out to the people. And to censor a president's press secretary is just unacceptable.
Mr. Trone.
I've said it on numerous intelligence briefings regarding interference by other countries, in particular Russia. And there's no question this is a major, major, major problem. The social media companies also have too much power here in America, and they're allowing this to happen while they rake in the profits. So it's not classified, and that is, the proof is crystal clear. Russia interfered with the 2016 election. The proof is crystal clear. Russia's interfering right now with this election. They worked against Hillary Clinton in the previous election. They worked to try and promote Bernie Sanders in the primary. And now Russia is trying to re-elect President Trump. So those are the facts. And we got to just stick with the facts. There's no place for outside interference in our democracy.
And Mr. Glock.
So cybersecurity is certainly very important. I wrote my first program in 1963 when I was 16 years old, and I'm still doing analysis and programming for clients. And way back in the 30s, we had communications laws, and we just defined what utilities are. And when we have 40% of our news going to people over Facebook, I'd like to define that as a utility. And I'd like to use the laws that we have regulating utilities to do that for these social media that have this kind of power. We have, and we also have laws, antitrust laws that we can use to break them up. They keep gobbling up more and more businesses, and we need to do just the opposite. We need to make sure that they have competition. And I would do my best to see that happen.
Thank you all. People use their concept of respect for life to argue about a number of issues, from abortion to family separation. Please tell us how you apply your understanding of respect for life to legislative choices and provide some examples. Mr. Trone.
I think the most important thing is decisions on abortion are medical decisions. They're decisions that should be made by a woman and her doctor. They're not decisions that should be made by male politicians or even any politicians for other people. Everybody has where they want to be and where they believe in, and we have to respect and have civility toward everybody so they can choose the way that works for them, their family, with their doctor. The other issue we have to talk about is the death penalty. And I've done a lot of work in criminal justice, and we worked with the ACLU, and we actually eliminated the death penalty in Washington State last year. But the death penalty is clearly cruel and abhorrent punishment. And we've got literally almost 100 folks that have been found not guilty that are on death row. So that's another area where lives are being taken wrongly.
Thank you, Mr. Gluck.
Sure, I agree with Mr. Trone about that. And also, I believe that we have made attempts to define when life begins. I'm not sure that we've actually can decide that. So I think, as Mr. Trone said, that should be a decision, but made by woman, possibly her partner as well, in conjunction, and the doctor. But what I'd like to see is more programs to make sure unwanted pregnancies don't happen in the first place. So we can cut down on the number of abortions that are occurring, which means a great deal more knowledge has to be given to young people who are engaging. And we know they're engaging no matter what we try. Every spring, my wife's a retired middle school teacher, and every spring, all her 8th graders turn from children to young adults. And that's when things start happening.
And Mr. Parrott.
Thank you. This is a great topic. As we look at capital punishment, I have to just reflect on the Capital newspaper in Annapolis. A person came in, shot up the newspaper staff. Many were found dead. And in Maryland, it's not a capital offense. So when he goes to plea bargain, all we can say is you're either going to have life in jail without the possibility of parole or life with the possibility of parole. So we can do plea bargain down to that. We have to have the death penalty. If you value life, which I do, I believe that life starts at conception and that it's a little baby in there, not a woman's choice because you're choosing to kill a baby. Now, some people have done that and there's forgiveness for that, but it is life begins, and we need to be able to protect life at all levels. So at the beginning of life, the end of life, I don't support euthanasia. I think that needs to be resisted. And I do support the death penalty because I think that's the only penalty that shows that we truly value the life of a person. If you take a life, then you need to forfeit your own life. And the Capital Gazette is a great example of why that needs to happen.
Our next question. What steps, if any, should our nation take to reform current immigration policies? In particular, how would you deal with the dreamers? First, we'll go to you, Mr. Gluck.
Okay, I'll take the second part first. The dreamers are here, not of their own volition. And some of them have been sent back to countries of their parents' origin, not knowing, especially Spanish in this case. So they have no country, basically, people without a country. I myself am an immigrant, but I came under a quota after World War II. I came here when I was 16 months old. And I think many folks have come here for much the same reason my parents did, because of upheaval in the countries they came from, political, economic, but mostly political upheaval. And we've attracted these folks who come here, and we've attracted others to work here. And I think we owe them a way to become citizens, not immediately, but some method to become citizens. They're paying taxes already, so we need to continue their road on.
Thank you. Mr. Parrott.
Immigration is a huge issue in our country right now, one that needs to be addressed and simply hasn't been addressed for a very long time. President Trump wanted to work with this Congress to come up with immigration policies. And unfortunately, this Congress simply refused to cooperate in any way at all to try and work bipartisan. That just didn't happen. It's very, very disappointing. We could have had good immigration policies that were changed. He was willing to allow the Dreamers to be here, had good legislation move forward. We talk about what happens at the border when people come across the border right now. People have talked about cages. Now that started under President Obama, but President Trump said we need more people to help process as they come across the border more quickly. He asked for more money to get the people, but instead this Congress said, no, we're going to force them to stay in those cages. We're not going to allow any kind of relief. And I think it's very, very disappointing. Again, this is a very partisan Congress that we're seeing, and that's another reason I'm running. I think we need to have a Congress. I would like to win so that Nancy Pelosi is replaced as Speaker of the House with someone who's a common sense conservative.
Thank you. And Mr. Trone?
I've actually been to the border in McAllen, Texas, and El Paso, Texas. I've seen the cages that President Trump put in, 150 men in a small cage with one toilet open in the middle of the room. And they certainly weren't leading us there. We went there on our own because we were willing to push past the tour, which was not going to show us those things. So we've got a real problem. I supported the Dreamers Act, voted for it. Those folks need a path to citizenship. It has to happen. We have to have a secure border, absolutely secure borders. But diversity is America's strength. That's what drives our economy. That's what drives good jobs. 40% of the Fortune 500 companies in America, Apple, eBay, Google, started by immigrants or the next generation, creating jobs, well-paying jobs for Americans. Diversity gives us that strength. We can completely reform our immigration laws, and we want the smartest people in America. If we don't, we're fools.
And this is the last question in our first round. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act was passed by the House of Representatives and sent to the Senate. If the Senate sends it back with amendments, what action will you take? Mr. Parrott.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act was passed by the House of Representatives and sent to the Senate. If the Senate sends it back with amendments, what action will you take?
Well, I don't think it's going to come back from the Senate the way that it's gone forward right now. I believe that when people go to vote, it's important that we have integrity in our elections. In the Maryland House of Delegates, I've introduced a bill several times that would require people to use voter ID when they go to vote. And I saw that demonstrated just this last November when I was campaigning for another candidate in Virginia. It was seamless. People show the ID and move forward. It was much, much quicker than the policy in Maryland, where they have to ask a whole bunch of questions to determine who the person is. Voter ID, it simply works. We need, again, to make sure that we have integrity in our elections and that people are voting, that we know who they are and we know that they're voting. Now, of course, we need to have elections where everybody can be involved, and that needs to be an open process. But we also have to make sure that only U.S. citizens are voting. I offered a bill in Maryland to require only U.S. citizens voting. We also have to make sure that, of course, that people only vote once. A person who was running against Andy Harris on the Eastern Shore, a Democrat, they found out she voted in 2 elections and was disqualified. But that happens rampantly. We need to preserve our system.
Thank you. Mr. Trone.
I went to Selma, Alabama, and Montgomery and Birmingham with John Lewis twice. He was a legend. He's an icon. We miss him. He fought for the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That act focused on every American having a chance to vote. That's where we need to be. We got to make it super easy, easy, easy. And that's what voting will get us, a better government if everybody participates. However, the case Shelby versus Holder, that Supreme Court case gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And since then, we've seen state after state. In the South, states that fought against integration, those states have put barriers up to make it harder and more difficult for people to vote. That is wrong, wrong, wrong. The John Lewis Act, we'll have to go at it again next year when we come back. But at the end of the day, that has to pass. We got to make it easy And voting by mail, safe, 100%, no fraud. Mail voting happens in 5 states with 0 fraud.
Thank you, Mr. Gluck.
Right. I can see why Mr. Parrott said having a voter ID makes it quicker. The problem is the folks who can't get voter IDs or empirically don't get them because they don't own cars and they can't get out of work to go wherever it is, especially in big states like Texas. So there are places where it's made impossible to get voter IDs, or virtually impossible. You know, I agree with Mr. Trone, Congressman Trone, that mail-in is the best way to go. I did that this time around. It is seamless. It's worked well in many states. I think if you are a citizen of the United States, it's easy enough to find out when you register that you are, and that ought to be the way it goes. If somebody votes illegally, we have ways to send them to jail. We have laws, and we have ways to send them, to punish them for doing that. And they're large punishments.
Thanks to all of you. That marks the end of our first set of questions. We now move on to questions that have been submitted by the community. And again, if you're a member of the audience and you have a question you'd like to submit to the candidates, please send it to the email address that was shown on your screen at the beginning of this forum. We received 2 related questions about early childhood education. Jeff asks, would you support the Child Care for Working Families Act to expand opportunities for 3- and 4-year-old children to have access to pre-kindergarten education programs? And Thomas asked, do you believe that pre-K education should be offered in public schools across the nation? And Mr. Trone, we'll start with you.
Well, and where we should start is success for all Americans, eliminating the poverty gap is good education. And absolutely, yes, yes, yes. That's why I'm on the Education Labor Committee. The ROI is 4-to-1 for universal pre-K. We have to have universal pre-K. We're at 41% right now across the country. It's an abomination. We haven't done that. We need to have education for our 2- and 3-year-olds because their brain is beginning to form at those ages. So they need to hear more words, not be parked in front of a TV. So we need to first take care of the 4-year-olds, then go to the 2- and 3-year-olds. But otherwise, our children are not going to be reading by 8, and we've got to get free community college. Garrett County has free community college, K to 14. We need to be there. It's inexcusable America doesn't have that, and we can absolutely afford it. Garrett College has done it, and it works.
Mr. Gluck.
Yes, my sister happens to be a retired award-winning Head Start teacher. She taught here in minority area in Montgomery County. In fact, she learned Spanish so she could speak to her Hispanic students' parents. And I observed her, and she managed to get her Hispanic students to the point where wealthier white students were when they got to kindergarten. It was difficult. The kindergarten teachers said it was difficult to tell the difference between her students and other students who had many more resources at home, to put it that way. So I absolutely agree. Universal Head Start type program, starting with 2-year-olds is fine. You know, one of the things that made this country great was the unleashing of women into the labor force. And we need to do more of that. We need to make sure whoever cares to come to work can do that. And having child care for everyone would be a good step in that direction.
And Mr. Parrott.
Well, it's nice to hear Mr. Gluck talk about his relative who was early childhood education with the Head Start program. I think that program is very good because Head Start is centered around people who are in poverty situations, children who are in that situation, to help educate them. You know, the vast majority of children get the best education they could ever get by listening to the words of their parents, listening to the words of the people around them, not other little kids who are 2 and 3 years old. You know, it's funny, we hear about these grand plans. Let's have free community college. Let's have 2-year-olds in the public schools. That is incredibly expensive, and it doesn't help kids. Actually, when we look at kids 4 years old who have started school, by the time they get to 8th grade, any kind of beneficial education that they had is gone, but their stress levels are much, much higher than those who are at school. You know, it's actually hurtful to the children to have them in that type of program. My mom was an early child educator. She taught at KI in Annapolis. It's a Jewish school, and I value early childhood education, but it's not the government's job to do that. It's the parents' job.
Andy and Judy have submitted questions about LGBTQ Americans. What is your opinion of the ability of federal laws to protect LGBTQ plus individuals from discrimination? And what will you do as a congressman to help protect the life and safety of those in the LGBTQ plus community? In particular, do you support the Equality Act to provide civil rights protections for all LGBTQ Americans? Mr. Glock.
Yes, civil rights are civil rights for whomever, whether it be persons of color, LGBTQ. Very simply, laws should be used to protect everybody. If we have specific, I might even call it terrorism, against a particular portion of our citizenry, we should be prepared to protect them as we would with kids. Not that they're kids, but you know, if they're being singled out for punishment by some group who doesn't like them for some reason, yes, we should protect them, and there should be laws to make sure that we do that.
Thank you. Mr. Parrott.
Great question. First of all, I'm a Christian, so as a Christian, I love every single person. The Bible talks about that. You know, as an American, every single person is equal under the law. I don't think we need to have special laws that have special punishments if you think the thought crime is one way or another. But I do think we need to have laws that protect every single person. And we do have laws on the books that help the LGBTQ community right now. And I think those laws are very helpful. But I do see some problems with the current situation. One is in girls' sports. I think we've gone too far. Girls need to compete against girls, not boys who have had testosterone their whole life. You know, in a couple states in the track finals, it's been boys who are actually winning, but they're competing as girls. That's just not fair to girls in any way at all. Also, bathrooms. People, when they use the bathrooms, need to know that it's the same gender that they're going to the bathroom with, and not an opposite gender. We've had many girls that have been abused in those types of situations. That needs to be stopped. That shouldn't be the law.
And Mr. Trone.
I'm a co-sponsor of the Equality Act. My company was one of the first companies ever to allow benefits for same-sex marriages. We did almost 20 years ago. Transgender community is 50% more likely to be unemployed. Tragically, up to 50% of the transgender community are attempt youth suicide by age 20. That's not the America we want. People have to have the right to choose. Delegate Parrott's position is right out of the 1950s. Our country is better than that. That is not who we are across this country. Delegate Parrott's suggestion that victims of HIV and AIDS should have a tattoo, a visible tattoo. To require them to be identified is offensive. I believe we're done with tattoos after World War II, and I think there's nothing more offensive to the Jewish community in this district than that idea itself.
I'd like to respond to that one. That was an attack.
I'm
Betty?
sorry, we don't have a way for you to do that. So perhaps you can speak to the congressman later. Question 3. Brian and Kayla have questions about the Affordable Care Act. Do you believe that pre-existing conditions should be covered by health insurance companies? And if the ACA is overturned, what would you do to replace it to ensure that people can continue to have health care coverage? Mr. Parrott.
The Affordable Care Act, unfortunately, is not affordable in any way at all. It's taken rates, health insurance rates, has skyrocketed. Our level of care has decreased. It needs to be overturned. We need to go back to the private market. Now, the question is, do we make sure that people with pre-existing conditions are able to still get health insurance? The answer is yes. The president's very clear on that. But I'm going to go back to the attack from David Trone, which I believe is inappropriate in this forum. I've challenged David Trone to a debate. And so far, he's refused to do any debates at all, except for this type of forum where we can't actually go back and forth. But I think that's important. And I challenge you again tonight for that debate. You mentioned something, an article back in 2004. This is over about 20 years ago, an article that I wrote when HIV was a death sentence. You know, I don't support that at all in any way today. And I said that back in 2010 when I ran as a delegate. But at that time, people were intentionally affecting other people. So people in the gay community were intentionally being affected and they were dying, and that was not fair. That needed to be stopped. There were other solutions out there. I got that from another idea. But again, that's not appropriate for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trone.
Healthcare, it's a human right, period. Everyone has to have healthcare in America. We've got to protect the ACA. It was not perfect when we wrote it. Nothing is ever perfect the first time out. But President Obama got it over the line. We're going to make it better and better and better. President Trump has no alternative. He's talked about it for 4 years. He's done zero, never shown a single plan. Nothing but talk, rhetoric. We need to protect people with pre-existing conditions. We need to prevent women from being charged more than men. And we have to expand healthcare, as the ACA did, to almost 20 million people, which is now being reduced as President Trump has made it more difficult. And Republicans are hell-bent on stopping the ACA with no alternatives. Mr. Parrott actually voted against protecting Marylanders from pre-existing conditions, of which now with COVID, there's 7 million more of us with a pre-existing condition we didn't have before.
And Mr. Glock.
Yes, so over the last 20 years, I've done a fair amount of work for CMS, Medicare folks, Medicaid folks. I worked on a new accounting system for them during the 90s. And then more recently, I did some work that dealt with the providers, making sure that they adhered to the 2,000-page requirements of ACA. And most recently, over the last few months, and the last few years actually, I worked for the department in DC that's in charge of making sure that as many citizens as possible are covered under ACA. 15 seconds, I can't tell you the whole thing, but I have no doubt that an improved Medicare for all, and by the way, I'm old enough to be using Medicare, improved Medicare for all can be accomplished within 4 years. I've seen lots of documentation about that, and I'd love the opportunity to implement that in Congress.
Thank you. Linda asks, my daughter, age 39, has been a drug addict for 20 years. The current program of methadone is not successful. She continues to use methadone and street drugs. What are you proposing to change the outcome of the drug epidemic? Mr. Trone.
Well, the number one focus I've had in Congress, I talked about all through the election. I lost my nephew. He was 24 years old, Ian Trone, to fentanyl. We understand what's happened. That's been my entire number one focus in Congress. I put together a bipartisan group, 65 members, 32 states, and we put together 50 bills, 50, all bipartisan, every one of them on mental health and addiction, because they're totally intertwined together. And those bills are working their way through. They're, as I say, going to pass because they're bipartisan. That's the key. I've also been appointed by Speaker Pelosi to be the only Democrat on the Fentanyl Commission, which has been charged with working with the executive branch, working with the Senate, and together we're going to figure out a way to stop the fentanyl, which is 100% coming in from China. Killed 71,000 people last year. Deaths in Western Maryland are up 52% year to date with COVID. COVID's killing more people through addiction.
Mr. Glock.
Yes, I think we have fine examples of countries overseas that have handled this problem much better than we have. Portugal is a prime example. we need to recognize that addiction is a health problem and a mental health problem, and treat it that way. Addiction to drugs, alcohol, whatever. As I said, there are numbers of countries elsewhere who have more lax laws, let's put it that way. I don't know that I can go specifically through all of them, but we can certainly look at those laws because empirically we can see that they have had a great effect of having fewer addicts in those countries, and fewer people die from addiction. So I'd certainly look at other countries and the way they've done that and bring some of those laws here.
Mr. Parrott.
Betty, could you repeat who asked that question?
Linda.
First, I want to say to Linda, I'm so sorry to hear about your child, that she is addicted to drugs. Street drugs is now on methadone. And you're right, there needs to be a better way. There's other drugs that they could use that would help them get off more permanently, but it's a huge, huge problem. And people need to get the help that they need when they need it. It's interesting, Mr. Trone mentioned that COVID is killing people, and it is. And why is it killing more people? It's because the government was intentionally shut down. David Trone would like to keep schools closed. I think schools need to open. The kids need to be in school. They need to be with their friends. This is what's hurting people. We're seeing more deaths now from suicide and overdoses and other things that we're actually seeing from the COVID itself. On this issue, David Trone says this is the most important issue, and yet there was an amendment that came forward with the Import-Export Bank that he voted against that would have helped fentanyl and opioids to stay out of our country. It only failed by 4 votes. I was very disappointed when he says that's his main issue, that he voted against it for partisan reasons. I don't think that's right for the people of District 6.
Suzanne and Bob have a question about the current pandemic. Maryland has been successful in controlling the spread of COVID-19. Do you believe the steps taken by Governor Hogan have helped reduce the spread of COVID-19? Please explain your answer. Mr. Glock.
Well, I think I'm going to answer it this way. My wife and I have taken walks to a local shopping center since the beginning of this. Kind of did my own experiment here. There's a Starbucks there, and my wife and I like their chai. So when we first got to it's a 6-mile round trip walk. When we first got there, Starbucks was closed. After a short while, Starbucks was open, and we had to wear masks and only get to the front door to order our drink. But after a while, they opened it up, and with masks and social distancing, circles 6 feet apart inside, and also shields to protect the workers in there, both from the public and between themselves. And it turns out that in thousands of, and I asked about this, in thousands of Starbucks all over the country, and these workers are 2-3 feet apart and talk to each other all day. Just the masks alone and washing their hands has been enough. So I think we need to continue that. And if we do that for a long enough time, we'll solve the problem here in Maryland and elsewhere in the country.
Mr. Parrott.
Well, that's a great question about COVID-19. It's interesting, the response by Maryland, half of the deaths that we've had happened in nursing homes. The same thing in New York. They had a high number of deaths in New York. Half of them occurred in nursing homes. Why is that? Well, I've heard from folks that are in the healthcare industries that people who had COVID would go to the emergency room, people in nursing homes, but they extended their stay. They couldn't stay there any longer and get paid. So they sent them back to the nursing homes, which affected the nursing home. That was very, very disappointing. I think it's not the way that we should have been handling it. Shutting down businesses, except for essential businesses, that just doesn't make sense. I believe every single business is an essential business. And when we see suicide rates going up, when we see people who are dying because of addictions going up, it's because of the government's response, an over-response to this disease. We're gonna have other diseases. Are we gonna shut down the whole economy again? Our national debt, and that's a huge problem, went up by 1/3 this year alone because of our response to COVID. It's not responsible, and it's not healthy for the American public.
Thank you. Mr. Trone.
I absolutely think we need to keep schools. We'd love to have our schools open. We'd love to have our businesses open. But at the end of the day, safety, safety, safety. We're not going to be alive if we can't to conduct business. Our children won't be alive to go to school. So we need to follow the science. That's what rules. I think Governor Hogan has done an excellent job. Follow the science, not politicians like in the White House. Hogan has followed the science. He's been steady, he's been science driven, and I think he's done an excellent work in this area. But at the same time, 200,000 people are dead. It's going to be 400,000 people because Trump is not following the science, and that's what we have to do. At the same time, I've disagreed with the governor on one thing, and that is unemployment work. We've had a fiasco on folks getting unemployment. And also, I disagree with the governor on making it harder to vote by mail. Everyone should have been mailed a ballot like they were in the primary. Worked great. Why not do it in the general instead of having a two-step process?
And now we have reached our last question. Kim and Jim ask a question related to COVID. Local businesses are struggling to remain open. The current relief bill has stalled in Congress. What do you propose should be done to get relief to our local communities? And we go first to you, Mr. Parrott.
Like I talked about earlier, every business is an essential business. The government closing down businesses, that just didn't make sense. A lot of the businesses that are closed will never open their doors ever again. Was that the government's role? To me, that's stealing property. To me, that's going against our freedoms that we enjoy as a populace. Yes, when this first came forward, the governor and other governors across the country said that COVID, we needed to make sure that we had enough ventilators in our hospitals. They wouldn't become overrun. Well, you know, we learned that they weren't going to be overrun within the first month. They should have, at that point, said, okay, let's start opening things up again. The American people need it. You know, we've talked about addictions, we talked about suicides. These are all up. I think at the end of the day, you're going to see that it's more than 200,000 deaths from those things, and you can't even really track them. But it's because the government's over-response to this problem, shutting down businesses that'll never open up again. I can share with you so many horror stories I've heard from people, and it's truly sad. We need to open up things right now.
Mr. Trone.
I'm a business person. I have over 10,000 employees across 27 states. I understand business inside out, backwards and forward. And it's that success that let me have an opportunity to serve the people of this district and help on areas like addiction, mental health. But frankly, we need to do more. The HEROES Act does more. We need to spend more monies to help these businesses. We can't just say they'll figure it out. Matter of fact, Mr. Parrott actually sued Governor Hogan. He sued our Republican governor for saying he was moving too fast on opening up, on not opening up, and putting safety first. The safety has got to come first. But right now we've got to get it done. It's time to stop arguing. It's time to work across the aisle. It's time to work as Americans, not as party members, and we can make a real difference, but we've got to keep going to the aid of the American people.
And Mr. Glock.
Yes, so our Congress chose, unlike other countries, to hand out a $1.8 trillion tax break early during this pandemic, and continued to do that. We've been living with trickle-down economics for 40 years, and that was another example of it. In other countries like Germany, the government said, well, you guys stay in business, keep working, we'll pay up to 80% of the income of your workers to keep them there. And it's that kind of, it's also, we talk about, we're going to have another bunch of homes being foreclosed on shortly. And once again, the question is, are we going to give the banks the money, or are we going to give the owners of the homes the money? We've chosen not to handle the 90% of us and lower 90% of us, rather the wealthiest 10% get the help before anybody else. Yeah.
Thank you all. That is the end of round 2. And we'd also like to thank all the audience members who submitted questions to us. We received many more questions than we could use, and we're really heartened at the level of interest that people in the community have in all of these issues. So thank you all so much for participating. At this time, each candidate will be given 2 minutes in which to make some closing remarks. Mr. Glock, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So I'm continuing from my first 2 minutes. I've seen proud men in the hills of Appalachia who wish only to work in dignity, but they cannot. For the mines are closed and their jobs are gone, and no one, neither industry nor labor nor government, has cared enough to help. I have seen the people of the Black Ghetto listening to ever greater promises of equality and of justice as they sit in the same decaying schools and huddled in the same filthy rooms without heat, warding off the cold and warding off the rats. We must begin to end the disgrace of this other America. And this is one of the great tasks of leadership for us. But even if we act to erase material poverty, there is another greater task. It is to confront the poverty of satisfaction that afflicts us all. Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is over $21 trillion a year. But that gross national product counts air pollution and drug advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder and chaotic sprawl. It counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America except why we are proud that we are Americans. I've condensed a half-hour speech into less than 4 minutes. Still, the words that Robert F. Kennedy spoke in 1968 ring true today. They highlight the half-century stasis that this country has experienced through both Republican and Democratic presidents and Congresses. I urge you all to please help me make America good again, this time for all of us.
Thank you. Congressman Trone.
I want to thank you, Betty, for doing a great job today. It was really a well-run debate. We appreciate your help. I'm proud of the work my team did and what I've been able to accomplish in Congress. And I look forward to continuing to work for the people in Maryland's 6th District. In business, you take care of the customer. In government, you take care of the constituent. Taking care of the constituent looks like a team staying late during COVID, a team helping fix over 3,000 unemployment compensation problems in Annapolis, helping over 7,000 constituents with their difficulties this year alone. It means traveling the district, a lot of road time in Western Maryland to meet people where they are. And during COVID, it means taking care of the constituent with phone calls, Zoom calls, and socially distant meetings in every corner of the district from Oakland to Potomac. But I'm also looking forward to continuing and prioritize the fight against the opioid epidemic and continuing the fight to what we need to do to address the mental health epidemic that have both been made so much more difficult because of COVID. And everywhere we need to continue to push for broadband for all Americans so rural America can stop falling behind. COVID pushed rural America behind with lack of telework, lack of teleeducation, lack of telehealth and mental health. We've got to fix broadband, and we've got to continue thinking about how we spend more money on medical research, because everything we do should be long-term, thinking about the next 20, 30, 40 years. Everything should be done about thinking about our children and how they can have a better life. And it's got to be bipartisan. We've got to bring Washington together. We've got to be in the middle, and we can really turn this around and make a difference. But it just takes working with each other, finding compromise. So thank you very much.
Delegate Parrott.
Eddie, thank you. And I want to thank David Trone and George Glock for this time being on this forum. And I do ask everyone here, George and David, if you would do a debate. I think that'd be very very insightful for people to actually have exchange of ideas going back and forth. It's interesting. I just heard David talk about how the government should get involved in medical research. Well, I've got a brother-in-law who they do medical research every single day. He's a chemical engineer. The private market is best for those types of solutions. We need private market solutions, not government getting in the way. When the government gets in the way, it often just creates more problems than it could ever solve. I'm here. I want to help us lower the taxes. I want to help us balance the budget. It's gone up by 1/3 this year because of our shutdown of COVID. That was irresponsible. We need to reform welfare. We need to get people back to work. District 6 needs to have more manufacturing jobs. We have to play it tough with countries like China to bring more of those jobs back here to our own country. I'm from District 6. I live in Hagerstown. I'm very, very invested in this community, whether it's Washington County, Frederick, Allegheny, Garrett, Montgomery. I'm there. I've been a delegate for 10 years. I've served very faithfully. I really care about constituent services. And as a congressman, I will continue to care about constituent services. I will help us to move forward as a community to get those manufacturing jobs that we need. I will help us to get more people working. I will continue to work to fight against drug abuse and help to really prevent some of those drugs from coming into our country. Most of them are coming right across the Mexican border. We need to build the wall there. We need to prevent drugs from coming right across, whether that's fentanyl, opioids. I would have supported that amendment that David Trone voted against. We need to have a hammer to prevent countries from illegally sending us their fentanyl and their opioids, and we know it, and all we can do right now is ask permission. Would you please stop? That's not right. That wasn't a good vote. That doesn't represent District 6, and it doesn't fight opioids. We need to really take action, and I'll be your person in Congress that will fight for us and fight for you. Thank you. May God bless you, and God bless this country.
Thanks again to all three of our candidates for participating tonight, and especially for being willing to serve your community by running for public office. We wish you all the best. Several people have worked behind the scenes to make this night's event possible, and I'd like to recognize them. Richard Wilson, president of the League of Women Voters of Washington County, has coordinated this event. Jim Filson, the Voter Services Chair of the Frederick County League, has also worked hard, and Kimberly Scott, a member of that committee. Shelley Miller from Washington County has been our excellent timer this evening, and especially to Antietam Broadband. Thanks so much to all of you. And now Carrie Burson, the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Frederick County, has some final remarks.
Good evening. In closing, remember that for election and candidate information, you have the League of Women Voters online and printed versions of our 2020 voters guides and the vote411.org website as resources. Launched by the League of Women Voters in 2006, vote411.org is a one-stop shop for election-related information. It provides information to the public with both general and state-specific details about topics including absentee or mail-in ballot information, early voting options, election dates, factual data on candidates, general information such as how to watch debates and forums with a critical eye, ID requirements in states that require identification, polling place and ballot drop box locations, registration deadlines, voter qualifications, voter registration forms, voting machine specifics, and anything else election related. Vote411.org also provides candidate responses in their own words to important questions like the ones we covered tonight. On behalf of all of us, thank you for your attention. Please stay safe and healthy, and remember to vote.